Mr. Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be back before the committee, this time on a different topic than last week, and with a slightly different cast of characters before you. We are appearing today regarding the prima facie contempt arising from the cyber attacks by a foreign-backed entity called Advanced Persistent Threat 31, allegedly supported by the People's Republic of China and targeting members of Parliament. We trust that our testimony today will assist the committee in its consideration of this important question. In his May 8, 2024 ruling, the Speaker broke down the question of privilege into two distinctive parts. First was the issue of the lack of notification of members of the cyber attack, and second was the actual attack itself. In his ruling, the Speaker noted that, since the attack, processes and protocols regarding notification of members had evolved. The Speaker notably referred to the May 2023 direction from the Minister of Public Safety respecting threats to the security of Canada directed at Parliament and parliamentarians. He also mentioned this committee's recommendation, contained in its 63rd report, that members of Parliament be notified by CSIS of the foreign interference threats targeting them. In the second part of his ruling, that is the cyber attack itself, the Speaker did find the matter to be an attempt to interfere with the work of parliamentarians and ruled that the matter was a prima facie question of privilege. Pour en arriver à cette conclusion, le Président s'est référé à la question de...
In reaching its conclusion, the Speaker referred to the prima facie question of privilege raised by the member for Wellington-Halton Hills, which was the subject of a ruling from the Speaker's predecessor on May 8, 2023. In this matter, the member was the subject of threats of reprisal by foreign actors for positions he had taken during debates. In his ruling, finding a prima facie case of privilege, the Speaker stated that the matter raised by the member squarely touches upon the privileges and immunities that underpin the collective ability to carry out parliamentary duties unimpeded. At the culmination of its study on this prima facie question of privilege, this committee presented its 63rd report to the House on April 10, 2024. While the report is not yet concurred in, it contains many recommendations. As the committee considers this latest question of privilege, it may seek to build upon the conclusions of that report and provide further recommendations to the House.
Recommendations in the 63rd report were directed at House administration. The first suggested that training on foreign interference be developed and offered as part of the members' orientation program and on a continual basis. This was something that had been in development for some time, and I'm pleased to say that it is currently being offered to caucuses and will be part of the next orientation program. The second sought a contact person to be assigned by the House administration to liaise with members on all matters related to foreign interference threats. The third and related recommendation suggests that a protocol be developed to inform the whips about foreign interference threats. I note that agreements with our security partners that are relevant to these recommendations are already in place. We'll be happy to provide further information about these later on during the meeting. Cette nouvelle question de privilège donne au comité l'occasion d'examiner certains éléments supplémentaires.
This new question of privilege provides the committee with the opportunity to consider some additional elements that were brought to light regarding cyber attacks toward members individually and to the House as a whole. Cyber attacks have several objectives, one of the most obvious being to disturb our technical systems and, as such, impact the ability of members to do their work. They can attempt to steal confidential information, impacting members' ability to work on sensitive files. These attacks might also be seen as attempts to intimidate members, therefore also interfering with the business of the House. When individual members are the subject of various forms of obstruction, the House as a whole can be impeded. As indicated by the Speaker in his ruling, these types of attacks are more and more common. The issue raised by the member of Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, related to cyber attacks by a foreign entity targeting emails, was considered, but other modern technology may be used to disturb the parliamentary proceedings. In some cases, the entities behind the attacks can be identified, and in other cases, they cannot.
There is in the difficulty for the House to assert its rights when a foreign entity is the sponsor of reprehensible actions. Furthermore, the House can, to a certain extent, mitigate the impact and risk when attacks target its own systems. When other systems, such as personal emails, are used by members to fulfill their duties, the House's ability is limited. Members can currently use various tools to fulfill their parliamentary functions, some supported by the House's IT services and others not. Lorsqu'il examine une question de privilège, le comité se prévaut généralement
When examining a question of privilege, the committee typically avails itself of the usual powers as it would when conducting any study. In terms of privilege, it will seek to establish the facts. It can propose remedies and proposals by way of recommendations in a report presented to the House. I'll now ask my colleague Benoit Dicker, Acting Chief Information Officer, to provide further information on cybersecurity at the House of Commons. Benoit. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here today to talk to you about cybersecurity in the House of Commons, specifically to give you information on our evolving cybersecurity posture and the House administration's commitment to protecting the institution and its users from cyber threats. The cyber threat landscape is constantly evolving, and it's becoming increasingly complex and challenging. The proliferation of technologies in this new digital reality is introducing significant growth in new threat vectors. In addition, the sophistication of threat actors is driving the House of Commons administration to continuously evolve and adapt our cybersecurity program to reduce emerging risks.
The administration IT security team has a specific mandate to strengthen Parliament's cyber resilience against a continuously evolving digital threat environment. Its role focuses specifically on the protection of IT resources availability to ensure the continuity of parliamentary operation and to protect the confidentiality, integrity of infrastructure system, users, including members of Parliament and their data, whether in Ottawa, in constituencies, or while traveling or working remotely. The House Administration's IT security team's mandate is for parliamentary information and devices only. Our role does not extend outside of members' legislative functions. La cyber-résilience.
Parliament cyber resilience relies on an integrated approach based on proactive measures such as ongoing monitoring, intelligence, threat hunting, vulnerability management, the development of incident response guides, and regular exercises. It is equally important to take reactive measures to ensure our ability to effectively detect incidents, threats, and security breaches, to respond quickly when they are detected, and to work with them and counter them as they occur.
From internationally recognized standard and best practice, such as ISO 27000 series, the NIST cybersecurity framework, ITSG 22 and 33. It ensures the security controls and processes are in place to mitigate cyber risk and respond adequately to cyber incident. In addition, this integrated approach is supported by various critical partnerships to effectively collaborate, share information, and strengthen our cybersecurity posture. I will share more information about these partnerships in the in-camera portion of this meeting. This concludes the public portion of our introduction, and we would be happy to take questions or answer any concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Messieurs Jantz and Zikar. Colleagues, just a quick reminder, I briefly suggested last meeting that it's helpful to the chair before you ask your questions if you have a timer in front of you or if perhaps the colleague next to you has a timer. It's certainly not required, but it just means I don't have to speak over you to interrupt, to keep you focused. I know sometimes it can be a distraction, but it's helpful, I think, to the efficiency of the meeting. Nonetheless, Mr. Jenis, the first 6 minutes is yours, and I turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Chair. We're here to discuss the fact that 18 parliamentarians were targeted by APT-31, a Chinese state-affiliated hacking outfit. I was one of the 18. The attack targeted parliamentarians involved in the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. I should note a great and important legislative network that brings together legislators from various countries and continents across different political traditions working on issues related to the CCP. I should have been informed about this attack. I wasn't, and my questions will focus on the notification of members. The government's public statements have suggested that they were aware of this attack. They chose not to inform members. They shared some information with House administration. Can you confirm whether or not and when the government shared information with House administration about this attack?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Janice. Through you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, there were exchanges between security partners and the House administration at that time. We can provide perhaps some more details during the in-camera portion, Mr. Janice. I think what was pointed out during the report, and certainly we can confirm from our end, and certainly our security partners can on their end, that if a similar situation were to occur today, things would certainly have been done differently than they were when this incident occurred.
The government could have informed members directly. From my perspective, there's no reason why they shouldn't have, and this looks like an excuse that they went and told somebody else. In the context of informing House administration, was it discussed whether or not members were informed? Did they express an expectation that members would be informed? Did they express an expectation that members would not be informed? Was that an issue in the conversation?
I hate to do this, Mr. Janice, but I'd like to suggest that perhaps that could be addressed during the in-camera portion.
Well, okay, I mean, I won't press the point more than to say this, that it's a question of political accountability for the government, whether or not they sought to get this information to members. So if they had asked you not to share that information with members, I think that would be germane to the public conversation around this issue. If they had made other comments, I mean, you know what you know, and I don't know it. So I'm not going to press you beyond your comfort level here. But I do think it is a matter of legitimate public interest what advice the government gave around informing members or not.
It's a fair point. Again, I think the preference would be to be able to provide a truly fulsome response to your question if we could do that during the in-camera portion.
Okay, well, maybe we'll follow up then, and then the committee can make some decisions at that time about what information should be shared publicly. One of the things that has really bothered me about it, I think most members were attacked at their parliamentary accounts. I was not. I was attacked at my personal account. It related to my parliamentary work, of course, but my personal email account, which is not published, was nonetheless targeted. And the response that we heard early on in a media comment made by the Speaker's office was that nothing to worry too much about because this attack was thwarted. My understanding, and if you could just clarify this, is that House of Commons security is not involved in monitoring or protecting the personal non-parliamentary accounts of members in any way. So the Speaker's office, House of Commons administration, would not in any way be able to say whether or not the attack was successful on a personal account. Could you comment on that?
I can confirm that. No, the House administration does not monitor in any way personal emails.
Okay.
About 90 seconds, Mr. Janice.
Okay. In terms of the protocols that were in place and that are in place now, there have been multiple cases where there were threats, members were not informed. Those protocols have changed, if I understand right, such that members would be, if this event were to happen today, members would be immediately informed. If you can maybe confirm that. And then also, does the directive mean that members would be informed of threats to them that began or took place prior to the introduction of that new directive that might still be relevant to them today?
Again, maybe I'll give a high-level answer, and we can get into it in a bit more detail during the in-camera portion. Indeed, there would be quicker communications with members than in the past, but I think there still is an issue in terms of threshold, because there are, as my notes and as the Speaker's decision alluded to, there are an awful lot of attacks, unfortunately, on the House, and we wouldn't want to see CSIS have a satellite office at the House because constant representations with members would be required, but certainly I think in this case, had it been the case today as opposed to 2-3 years ago, it would have been handled differently.
Okay. 15 seconds I have left, then that still seems fairly unclear, though. I mean, I understand that there are lots of threats, but if an individual member, because of work they're doing, is specifically being targeted, it's not a generalized threat, it's a specific targeting of a specific member because of work they've done on a foreign policy issue by a foreign government, it would seem reasonable to me that that member has a right to know, especially when they can take remedial action to protect themselves, both with their parliamentary and non-parliamentary accounts. But you're saying it's still not a certainty that they would be told.
Again, I hate to do it, but if we can get into that during the in-camera portion, we can give you a more fulsome response.
I think it's
Mr.
a
Jennison,
matter of significant public
I've been
interest. Okay.
courteous with the time here. Colleagues, just in the event that you do find that you're getting to your final kind of 20 or 30 seconds at the beginning of a round, feel free to give the time back to the chair. I'll simply add it to your time later on so that you can have more efficiency in the line of questioning. I certainly don't want to cut off any type of productivity. But Mr. Jennison, thank you very much. Ms. Romanato, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being back at PROC again. I do have questions that I anticipate you will only be able to answer in the in-camera portion, so I will save some of those for then. And perhaps once we do a full round, perhaps if it's the will of the committee, maybe we might want to start that in-camera session a little sooner rather than asking questions that unfortunately can't be answered in public. With that, the CSE has provided PROC with a timeline of events that walk us through this situation and provide us with the dates on how this came about. And I'd like to ask a question, I guess it would be to Benoit Dicker, about what is the protocol right now? We understand a parliamentary IT or email account is being monitored, obviously. But what is the protocol right now in the event that the House of Commons receives a call from whether it be CSE to say, we have reason to believe that a parliamentarian's private email has been targeted. Walk us through what would happen, because there seems to be some information in this chronology that despite multiple contact points with the House of Commons administration, things were not done, or it took a couple of days before action was taken. If you could walk us through, that would be helpful.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Romanato. So it doesn't happen often that partners on the cyber front, because they understand our mandate when it comes to specific, threats regarding personal identity of members. So it's not coming from a lot of instances, because usually our interactions with partners are always about through our mandate specifically. And as you know, some of these agencies have specific mandates, and they only interact with us when it matters to Parliament specifically. So in terms of a protocol that would be, so if we take information from various partnerships, as you will know when we speak in the in-camera portion, I can allude more to it. But any information coming to the parliamentary cybersecurity team would be triage, okay, and handled. And then we would look at the level of risk tied to the threat specifically. So if it is a physical threat, or then we would liaison with my colleague, the Sergeant at Arms. If it is foreign interference, these types of scenarios, we would go with our Sergeant at Arms specifically. Most of our relationships, from my perspectives, are on the technology side. So when it comes to specific technology elements, very rarely we would get an email or an interaction specifically targeting someone, but mostly targeting an infrastructure or these types of scenarios. So I think in general, that's probably the best answer in public I can do, but maybe Stefan can add something.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. We have a clear, through the board, in 2014, we modified the acceptable use policy to actually clearly articulate the process if ever there's a member's information, personal information is targeted. and the cybersecurity to get access, the cybersecurity group, in all cases when a member's information is put at risk, the discussion first happens with the member's office and directly with the member. This is the process that is documented and was approved by the Board of Internal Economy for specific threats to members. And if ever we need to access content, and the content would not be shared with the members, from the members to the House administrations, because we need to have your authorizations to do so. Then after that, we could escalate this to the House officers, because if we feel that the House infrastructure is at risk and we need to protect the institution, we would then get into that discussions. But the document that we follow for incidents relating to members is the acceptable use policy of 2014.
So, Monsieur Aubé, if there was this acceptable use policy in 2014, these events happened in 2021. So if there's already a policy in place that clearly articulates the protocol to follow in the event of a non-House of Commons IT possible cyber attack in the case of MP Genius, why wasn't he contacted? If you just mentioned that you need to have the approval of the MP in order to access that information, how come he was not made aware?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our mandate from an IT security perspective focuses on Parliament and the role of the member, the legislative role of the member. We're not engaged currently in personal protection of members' information. So in the case of such event, if I don't have access to the information, I can't basically follow the protocol. So members that would have been affected with House infrastructure would have been notified.
So you just mentioned you currently are not engaged with IT systems that are outside of House of Commons, correct?
Outside of House of Commons mandate, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Madame Gaudreau, à vous pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. A bit of an introduction to begin with, because so much has happened in the last hours, really. So I put this down on paper to be clear. Over the last few months, we have learned that MPs were targeted and that their personal emails had been targeted by foreign entities, foreign states. And this involved sensitive information. The aim, I would imagine, would be to intimidate them or to use the information in some nefarious fashion. Malicious way. So we learned yesterday that NCCOP was signaling that this was an alarming situation. So then it all became clear to everyone. The government tried to do something then. Something has to be done. And I have the impression that the Prime Minister is not taking this issue seriously enough. Actually, MPs are benefiting from this because when it comes to foreign interference, they could even kind of encourage it, and that's what I find shocking here. Meanwhile, we learned that false documents, I've got all these documents here, documents that you're aware of that are probably in Russian that are being shared on the internet related to the upcoming Olympic Games in Europe, and European media receive copies of this online, fake news, highly realistic fakes, unbelievably realistic. There's even a series of them that comes, that actually increases the level of confusion for everyone. So a couple of days away from the European elections, 700 million people, imagine how large an electoral cycle this is. So you're into all this. I'm trying to grasp how it comes that we at PROC have met yet again to, try to deal with this foreign interference. We've got such a big step up to make here. So honestly, I have to tell the public that I don't have the impression that we're very well equipped to deal with this. So that's okay. So that's my sort of introduction. Now, I understand that parliamentary privilege, unless it's interpreted differently than I understand, but it really covers everything involving our work, both in the ridings, here in committee, and so on and so forth on the Hill. So now this is about personal information via a Gmail email. So, of course, this is, pretty deep. They could see our bills, our financial information, everything that identifies us. I mean, emails are a considerable source of personal information, and the resulting capacity to intimidate us could be really stupendous. So how and why is it different for the MP from Halton Hills? Would you like to begin, Michelle? Thank you for the question. I will address the parliamentary privilege elements, and then my colleagues will be able to get into the details regarding IT infrastructure at the House. Now, the Speaker of the House made a decision and recognized that there was interference and threats related to an MP with regard to his parliamentary duties. And it's a prima facie interference and parliamentary privilege matter, even though the attack, as you say, focused on his personal email. So, and as you say, there are thus possibilities of his being intimidated, other threats made. That said, when it comes to parliamentary pursuits, what's under the control, really, of the parliamentary administration, and here I'll ask my colleagues to speak to this based on our mandate, our ability to become involved is, framed in a very specific way. I'm not sure whether my colleague, Mr. Obey, would like to add anything. Thank you, Michel. And through you, Chair, what we can do based on our abilities is protect the institution, protect the corporate security of Parliament. And that's how IT technology has been set up to ensure that we can do that. Our partnerships as well are there to ensure that, to protect the Parliament of Canada, to ensure that its work is not interrupted. And we do this in a number of ways with regard to MPs when they're traveling, when they're in their ridings, when they're on the Hill. But when it comes to people's private lives and international relationships, we are not equipped to deal with this. There are other government agencies that are better equipped. Okay, I get that. And I'm highly reassured as a parliamentarian, let me say that up front. I've seen the good effects of your work. But who could help us in this instance? You say there are others who could and can and do contribute to the work that you carry out. And, this is a threat that's endemic. It's everywhere. It's not just when I'm on the Hill. It's there when I'm at home, too. So who's there to help us, and who helps you? About 20 seconds, Mr. Jans. It's a teamwork, of course. There's the House administration. We have our partners on the Hill in the parliamentary precinct, and then we have our other partners, police forces, security forces, and it's a partnership involving all these groups that helps us face this challenge. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
With us today, we turn to you for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I appreciate joining you virtually, as difficult as that sometimes is. I kind of wanted to continue that line from Madame Gaudreau. I'm concerned, of course. Also, she had referenced the new news that had come out of the report relating to members of Parliament being influenced, and that line between a personal and our parliamentary lives, existence, work. We are very political, partisan actors, I guess you could say. I certainly want to ensure that my parliamentary work doesn't interact with my partisan political work. So I keep those separate. I don't run a lot of that partisan work or NDP type, fundraising activity, whatever you may call it. I don't run that, of course, through my parliamentary email. And yet that is being highly impacted in terms of foreign interference. We're seeing that in terms of conversations that have just been released in the media around the Conservative leadership race. So can you talk about, again, that the personal attacks that we're receiving, how we're supposed to continue to separate those and ensure that that we are not bad actors in as we are trying to do both sides of our work in this role.
Maybe I'll start on this one. It's a very good question, Ms. Matheson, and obviously something the committee will want to reflect on. Certainly, for example, what's bringing us here today in Mr. Genis's case, traditionally questions of privilege, parliamentary proceedings are related to the chamber or committee. In this case, it was the work that Mr. Genis did with an outside organization, but that very much then, how could I say, it influences or it assists his work in the chamber or in committee. And as a result, in part, that's why the Speaker decided that this is a prima facie case and deserves more a study. So I don't know if my colleagues want to speak to it. Maybe Pat?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand the question correctly, it's that you may be receiving harassing email on your personal accounts or in your personal life and not on the parliamentary side of things. Madame Matheson?
It's more about that separation that we have. We are political, we are partisan, and that work has to happen outside of the parliamentary precinct and those controls that you have. So how do we assist you in terms of that separation, but also the protection of both sides of our lives?
So my area is responsible for, I think, both sides. On the personal side, if you have a security concern, you could come to my office and then we'd analyze it and reach out to the appropriate security agency, whether it be CSIS, the RCMP, police force of local jurisdiction. But we don't have that separation in the Sergeant-at-Arms office of what's Parliament and what's personal. Our only concern is the safety and security of members of Parliament.
So that NSICOP report that was just released made reference, however, to members of Parliament who are wittingly or semi-wittingly providing intel to foreign governments. So if we don't know what's happening on that personal side, how are we supposed to better protect, how are we supposed to know to communicate with the Sergeant of Arms, for example, on those issues and those threats if we don't perceive them in that way? Like, it gets fairly complicated.
Yeah, and I took your question as being like it would be overt in nature, the communication on your personal side, not covert in nature. So, of course, when it's covert, it's much more difficult to detect.
How then do we? So I'm trying to get at this NSICOP report that's been released. How are we supposed to ensure that we are not providing that intel in that personal space as well? Are you working with the institutions like CSIS or what have you? And I guess further to that question, are there barriers that you have seen that this committee could deal with to help with these complicated cases that the NSICOP report revealed just this week?
Okay, so we have orientation sessions coming up. Public safety is coordinating with us, and we're bringing in CSIS and CSE and the RCMP to give briefings to the caucuses. And also, we've stepped up our security awareness area. The last Board of Internal Economy, they gave me more resources so we can do a better job at briefing members of Parliament on threats, current threats, and keep them up to speed on what the current threat environment is.
But a lot of this is then on the individual entirely. This is on the MP themselves to know.
Ms. Matheson, if I'll afford Mr. McDonnell a very quick response, but you're out of time.
Sorry, I forgot to push my timer.
Not
Mr. Chair.
a problem. Mr. McDonnell, did you want to respond very quickly?
Well, I always think security is a shared responsibility, and if the more that we know to serve you with, the better job that we can do providing the security for the members.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now into our second round, so we're down to different periods of time. Mr. Jennings, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. When it comes to protecting the security of our democracy, I'm concerned that this government in particular is trying to pass the buck and avoid responsibility on this. House of Commons IT, as I understand, has a very specific and narrow mandate. That is to protect the IT systems of the House of Commons. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we've received unclassified information regarding conversations that happened between the government representatives, and the House of Commons, and they suggest that yes, the government provided information to House of Commons IT of a largely technical nature, saying these are attacks that we're aware of, and here's some information that you can use in the context of protecting members from those attacks insofar as they relate to the House of Commons IT system. Is that correct?
Did you want to go further on that?
No, that's correct.
That's correct. So the government has, as an excuse for not informing members, said, well, we thought it was up to the House of Commons to do it. It seems to me to sort of stretch any evaluation of reasonableness that technical information given to House of Commons IT would lead to those IT professionals, saying, I'm going to leave my cubicle and go upstairs and start talking to members of Parliament about these threats. That doesn't seem to me to be the job of House of Commons IT professionals. Would you agree with that?
Thank you for the question, through you, Chair. We action everything that is sent to us, okay,
right,
depending on risks and those elements. And I think we can probably provide more information around specific information that we received through this unclassified briefing in the in-camera version. But just as a publicly, I think I could say that it's not. These types of intervention are kind of piecing a puzzle together. It is not we specifically provide you information around the following. It is
well, yeah. I guess what I'm just trying to get at is generally who's responsible for what, because we don't want buck passing when it comes to security. We want people to take responsibility for the things that they're responsible for, and maybe I'm stereotyping, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to me that it's likely the job of IT professionals in the House of Commons who are given technical information for responding to the threats to take that information and go around the halls saying, I think I need to let members of Parliament. No, that seems like a function for security experts in the government to be evaluating, not technical IT folks in the House of Commons. Am I right about that? I see folks nodding, but not.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is the case, Mr. Genius. Like we take the threats that are identified for us, we hunt for them, and then once we've hunted for them, if we find them, we address them, and if it's impacting members, we will. But the threat actor that's coming to us and their intention, we're not aware of this. We're just dealing with the actual threat.
Right. So the government of Canada in their communications around this have tried to blame their failures to communicate with members of Parliament about threats on you. They've tried to say, well, the people with a very narrow and specific mandate around the House of Commons IT system somehow should have taken it upon themselves to assess, measure the threat, and go and inform members. And what you're confirming is that you have a specific mandate around protecting the House of Commons IT system. It doesn't include my personal email, and it also doesn't include broader assessments of security threats and of what is or is not in the public interest to inform members. So if you're comfortable answering this question, like, what is your response to the government's communications around this that seem to want to direct the blame to you instead of take responsibility for their decision not to inform members?
It would be best to deal with that in camera, sir.
Okay. Okay, you are fully protected in whatever you say before this committee, but I don't want to put you in more of an uncomfortable position than the government already has, because I have a great deal of respect for the work done by House of Commons employees, but expecting someone to do something that's not their job isn't fair or reasonable. As has been said, you're not tracking my personal emails. You're not addressing my security in those kinds of situations. And you're not our security agencies. The House of Commons is not a security agency. It's the government's responsibility to communicate with members about these matters, and they fail to do it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jennis. Madame Fortier, c'est à vous pour 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
You have 5 minutes, Ms. Fortier. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here to respond to our questions. My first question, then, just to try to understand this in greater depth, besides the members of IPAC, whom we know were targeted, are you aware of any other targets among parliamentarians besides in IPAC that were targeted during this time period?
Pour d'autres parlementaires, juste
Regarding other parliamentarians, then, clarification, you mean Canadian parliamentarians? No, not among Canadians. We have no supplementary information beyond what has been shared. There are other parliamentarians, though, outside of Canada who have been targeted. Thank you very much. As an MP, of course, this is of the highest concern to me, everything that took place then and that, may have been taking place since. Are you able to explain, if an MP receives a troublesome or worrisome email, what should they do about it? Through you, Chair. Excellent question, Ms. Fortier. We do have protocols for this, especially, let me, deal with emails. We have a number of mechanisms. We have a 24/7 telephone hotline, cybersecurity services, and we're able to analyze the emails. We have a number of educational campaigns a lot linked to this. You may have seen the little button, for phishing that you can use to report such an email. As you know, this matter was brought up a couple of years ago, and since then, we have received a ministerial directive to the effect that MPs must be immediately informed whenever a threat is detected. Has this directive, improved matters? Has it made it easier to get information through to the House of Commons, and are MPs better informed than they used to be? Do you think, as well, that had this taken place after the directive came down, the results would have been different? Okay, I'll respond to what I can respond to, Madame Fortier, through you, Chair. Ms. Fortier, when we are informed of a risk, of course, we do our duty. We contact the MP. Most of the time, when we're contacted, though, we see a very specific type of technical threat that we need to deal with without knowing who the perpetrator is. I can't say, per se, whether there's intergovernmental risk, whether it's a state actor. We don't know. So, Mr. Dicat, a little earlier, you were sharing a list of threats, sort of levels of threats, seeming to say there's a type of classification of threats. Is there a level of threat after which you must communicate with the MP or the parliamentarian? Generally speaking, every time something is shared with us, it's usually very technical information. So then it's a matter of analyzing the information to see whether anyone specifically was targeted or whether it's a group of people who've been targeted or perhaps an infrastructure. Then, based on the risk level, we take action. If, as Stéphane mentioned in his opening remarks, if there's a specific targeting, if we see that someone is being targeted, then we will speak to the office. For example, I've got a number of situations where the cybersecurity teams have called an MP's office to validate specific information, so that's our protocol. we take into account the efficiency of our defense system or defensive approach, and then if there's a risk to the MP, more specifically, we speak to their office. Okay, a simpler situation. When it takes place, you said you need to contact, you mentioned the office, the MP's office. Do you reach out to the MP first, or do you just speak to a member of their team, or just tell us what your approach is? That could help us as well. I'm sure it could make it easier for us to see clearly how you're working through your team to our team. About 25 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Fortier, when an MP is targeted, my first reaction is to contact them. If we can't do that, we'll speak to their chief of staff. And if we can't reach the chief of staff, we'll speak to someone in their office. And we'll ask someone to reach out to the MP and have the MP contact us. That's how we work. Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone. Ms. Gaudreau, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Well, I confess that I am highly concerned indeed for our very democracy and its survival. You know, there is legislation coming down soon, and this is a big change. We need to make relevant changes, and it's all very disconcerting. I'm also concerned that our abilities seem to be somewhat inadequate. A little later, we'll be speaking in camera, and what I would like to ensure is that we get, and you're the right people to provide it, that you give us some idea of what you need in any emergency situation. What do you need to prevent, take action, and correct such threats? And in this regard, what's the role of any parliamentarian when propaganda can move right into our personal accounts? And I might not even be able to understand what is true, what's not true, what's fake, because there are a series of fake information sources now, and people are influenced by this material. So for those following this discussion, all your recommendations will make their way into a report, and I will have very specific questions to put to you in our in-camera meeting. Thank you, Chair. You have time for an answer? Yes, we'll be able to discuss this further shortly. And as the Sergeant-at-Arms said a moment ago, about 2 or 3 meetings back at the Board of Internal Economy, considerable resources were approved, especially to the Office of the Sergeant-at-Arms, and other services as well that are security-related were authorized. So I think we're now in a good position to work on this issue, and we'll be happy to answer your questions in the in-camera portion. What I can say is that what's been created so far is working very well. I received a briefing from CSIS, and I also got some assistance from the Sergeant-at-Arms, but I think that we need to follow up. Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
Thank you. So on this question of privilege, we weren't alone in finding out about the hack through the media. Other members of the IPAC, Belgium, New Zealand, Australia, others, they found out about that hack, as I understand it, through public reporting as well. And their governments are from all different political sides throughout the spectrum, and they, in fact, did not inform their members in a majority of cases. What are we doing to inform ourselves, learning from those other investigations, those other parliaments, studying this issue? How are we moving that into our own studies and how we deal with this locally?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Madison, this is a great question. In the in-camera portion, I can talk a bit more about our partnerships, but definitely I can state publicly that we have partnerships with other parliaments that were impacted as part of these types of attacks, and our dialogue is always constant with those partners in those parliaments. Thank you.
Okay. We're seeing, obviously, there are various levels of understanding of how serious this is, even in terms of the NSCOP report that I had referenced before and that's been in the media. There's a different interpretation of that intelligence. How are you being given the ability as a non-intelligence gathering organization to come to the conclusions in terms of the scope of foreign interference? Do you have the adequate resources that you need? This is often a conversation that we have in terms of even within the harassment study. Do you have the appropriate resources that you need? Is there something that we can better inform this committee going forward as we report that is required?
It's a very good question, Ms. Matheson. I think for the moment, we feel that we are properly resourced with what the Board of Internal Economy recently accorded us. But again, that could change going forward. But I think, speaking on behalf of my colleagues here, that for the moment, we feel that we have the resources required.
Is there a discomfort in terms of the interpretation or in the interpreting of this intelligence on the part of the House of Commons and security agencies because of that disconnect?
Just in a few seconds,
or that
please.
Non-nature of being an intelligence agency?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We have an excellent relationship with the external or with the security agencies. There's absolutely no discomfort on our part when we deal with our principal partner for intelligence, and that would be CSIS.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matheson. Mr. Duncan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here this morning. I have a couple of questions, and the first I want to recognize that I'm asking this question in a public setting, so I want to set the premise that I'm not requesting you divulge any specific names of members or foreign state actors in your response. The Speaker ruled that the failure to notify Mr. Jennis and the other MPs who were targeted in this case did amount to a prima facie question of privilege. House administration, the government, and security agencies were aware of both specific members and a specific foreign state actor as a threat, and members were not informed until external revelations came to light, in this case, the FBI, Department of Justice in the U.S. Mr. Jennis rightfully raised the point of whose responsibility it was to speak to members about that. But that aside, I want to ask each of you a yes or no question for reasons of not divulging anything from a security perspective or anything under review. Are any of you aware of any other past or current cases in which you, in your respective roles, have been informed by the CSC, CSIS, the FBI, any security agency, or anyone in the federal government that an identifiable foreign actor targeted or is targeting an MP or group of MPs, and the individuals being targeted have not been informed of that threat? When you know a specific member or members and you know of a specific foreign state actor, are you aware of any outstanding notifications to members that have not been done yet?
I can answer from a cyber perspective. No, we don't.
Anybody? No. Go ahead, Pat.
It would be no, sir.
So there's no outstanding claims that you're aware of. In this case, you were aware of members being targeted, aware through security agencies who the specific. There's no other outstanding cases that 3 months down the road we're going to see through a whistleblower or a media report that X, Y, or Z happened. There's nothing outstanding that anybody has of what outstanding of members not being notified that you're aware of.
Through you, Mr. Chair, anytime our principal partner for intelligence contacts us and provides us information in regards to a member of Parliament, we put them in immediate contact with that member of Parliament.
Mr. Jansen, I want to ask you a question. The committee adopted a document production order directed to the government and to House administration. The order permits government departments to make redactions consistent with the Access to Information Act. Since the House of Commons and in your role is not a government department nor subject to the Access to Information Act, can you confirm that the House administration will be providing us with the unredacted documents in response to this order?
That's certainly our intent. Michel, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, we received the order, production order from this committee. The way we read the order is that the House administration is considered as a department. So we were to apply the principle that were set in the order, respecting the redactions. If the committee wants to provide further clarification on the production order, we'll be happy to implement the production order as adopted by the committee.
The way you read that as a department, but the House of Commons is not, when we read this, is not a department, and it is not an agency, so it would not be encompassed with what was the directive of this committee.
Sir, and through you, Mr. Chair, and respectfully, when committees adopt production orders, we have to interpret them. When we read the order, the way it was written, and it's not unusual in an act of parliament where the House of Commons is deemed to be a department for a very specific purpose, but in general, and because of separation of power, and very clearly, the House of Commons is not a department. So that's how we read the production order, that we were assimilated to a department for the purpose of that order. So we were empowered to, well, not empowered, but we were to suggest redactions to the committee. And if I may say, the production order refers to acts of parliament. It's not clear because it refers to the Access of Information and Privacy Act. Well, those are two separate acts. So when dealing with production orders, we always have to interpret them when there's ambiguity. And if I may say, if there's any need to consult the administration and our office when drafting such production order, we'll be happy to assist to make sure that the intention of the committee is reflected in the order.
Mr. Duncan, I'm afraid that's all the time allotted to you this round. Mr. Collins, I have you for our final 5 minutes before we suspend briefly. Over to you, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Let me start with what the threshold is in terms of when we understand that a member has been attacked in any shape or form. We've heard or we've read in the report that these instances happen quite often, probably on a daily basis, in terms of actors who are seeking to undermine our efforts in terms of moving our business forward. But what is the threshold from the team? And I heard the word teamwork today. What's the threshold from the team as it relates to notifying members? What's considered a minor threat? What's considered a threat that raises a red flag internally to say the member needs to be informed?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, I can speak briefly about the cyber portion, and then my colleague can probably speak about the risk around the physical threats. So anything touching members' data, members' information is deemed to be critical. So if there is anything around those parameters,